Good evening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Ross Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. On Tuesday, Israeli forces conducted one of the largest raids in months on foreign currency exchanges in the occupied West Bank, injuring dozens of Palestinians with live rounds, tear gas and rubber-coated bullets in the towns of Ramallah and Hebron. This also comes as earlier today, dozens of people were injured in an Israeli military raid on the Palestinian city of Nablus in the very same occupied West Bank. At least 80 people were wounded, including several others who were hit with live ammunition. Now, this comes as Israel continues its genocide in Gaza. And of course, this idea of a quote-unquote greater Israel project, as attacks have occurred in Lebanon and also in Syria. With the Syrian situation, Benjamin Netanyahu and his government says this is being done in order to go ahead and protect the minority Druze community. Whereas when it comes to Lebanon, a ceasefire that was intact there seems to be violated once again by Tel Aviv. This is being done with impunity as Israel continues to expand what it wants to do with regards to this greater Israel project. Joining me from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, I'd like to welcome Aseel AlBajeh, who is an advocacy and campaigns officer at the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. Aseel, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Aseel, what we saw in Ramallah with regards to the raid there, it should come as no surprise, should it? Because this has been boiling down for quite some time. And a few weeks ago, we saw Israeli military vehicles driving past that very same town. But what we saw on Tuesday, not really a surprise.
Indeed, and definitely thank you for your introduction as well, which does show that these are not isolated military raids. And I would say it is not one of the largest military raids, the one that happened on Tuesday in Ramallah city where I live. As usually Israeli occupying forces raids do happen mostly in villages, in refugee camps, but it is more rare to happen in central cities in daytime. Now, what does this tell us, and what does this specific military raid where there were dozens of Palestinians injured, including a 13-year-old Palestinian who is now in critical condition, and occupying forces are also trying to insert domination over all parts of the West Bank. They want to insert and show off that they can do whatever they want, wherever they want, including in cities and headquarters of what constitutes the Palestinian Authority headquarters, where supposedly they do enjoy sovereignty and control over this part of the city. So this is one indication of this particular military raid. But of course, it is really important to remind the audience that this is not an isolated incident, and that since October 7th, 2023, there has been very much accelerated military raids all across the West Bank, especially, as I said, in villages and military camps. For example, in northern West Bank, in Tul Karem and Jenin refugee camps, the daily reality of Palestinians residing there is daily military raids. And when we say military raids, we are talking about Israeli occupying forces raiding with military jeeps, with bulldozers, even with airstrikes from the sky. We're talking about arbitrary and daily arbitrary detention of Palestinians. Most Palestinians are placed in what we call administrative detention, which is detaining Palestinians with no charge and based on a so-called secret file. We're talking about destruction of the infrastructure of Palestinian roads and so on. We're talking about destruction of Palestinian homes. We're talking about also how Israeli forces use Palestinian homes as military bases for their attacks and killings and so on. Right now, for example, in Jenin, where I was mentioning Jenin and Tul Karem refugee camps, we're talking about since 2024, more than 32,000 Palestinians have been displaced from their homes in these from the refugee camps. And here it's important to mention that when we say refugee camp, this is a place where Palestinian refugees are residing who are denied their right to return since 1948. So this is waves and waves of ethnic cleansing for the Palestinian people that has been continuing for decades. I just want to also mention one devastating figure about Palestinians killing during these military raids by either Israeli forces or settlers who are armed, that since October 7th, 2023 and until the end of July this year, 2025, according to the UN, more than 1,477 Palestinians have been killed across the West Bank. This year alone, in 2025, we have seen the Israeli occupying forces and settlers killing 129 children, Palestinian children. And these killings happen, as I explained, in the context of military raids, but they also happen in the context of settlers attacking Palestinian communities.
I want to touch on the settler attacks, Aseel, because I think we've been seeing this viral video of an elderly Palestinian lady coming face to face with an Israeli settler. This is, of course, the daily reality of many Palestinians. These settler attacks, again, you've mentioned the word isolated. It doesn't occur in isolation. We see this occurring, but to that, they get assistance from the Israeli occupation forces. Talk to us about that, because the settlers wouldn't do this without the assistance of not just the IOF, but also various other branches of Israeli security.
Indeed, that is correct. And Israeli settler attacks have been happening for decades in occupied Palestine. What we see since October 7th is just acceleration of these attacks. And how these settlers attacks happen. First of all, these settlers, we should remind ourselves that these settlers are residing illegally in the occupied Palestinian territory. And this has been confirmed by the International Court of Justice in a ruling in September from last year, that all the settlement infrastructure is illegal, but also the entire military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza is illegal. So this is the context. Now, how do these settlers actually get emboldened to continue their attacks and accelerate their attacks is, as you said, with the protection from the Israeli army. So, for example, if a group of settlers who are armed and allowed to be armed and continue to be armed decide that they want to invade and attack communities, for example, from last month, accelerated attacks in Masafer Yatta communities, which is in the south of the West Bank, they would go and the Israeli army would be either just watching them as they are attacking using live ammunition, destroying Palestinian homes and infrastructure, stealing resources, water, stealing in Bedouin communities, for example, the sheep and so on of the Palestinian communities. So the Israeli army would be watching them or actively supporting them. So in many of the incidents where settler attacks have been happening, you would see both the army and the settlers inflicting violence on Palestinian community. I just want to mention one story that was actually caught on camera of last month, a Palestinian in Masafer Yatta community that I mentioned. His name is
Oda. You're talking of Oda. Yes, yeah.
Exactly. He's a prominent community activist in the area. And a group of settlers, this was shot on camera, just attacked the community. A settler who is well known as well, including to the international community. He's actually the settler sanctioned by many Western countries, including France and the UK and the EU and so on. He was sanctioned because of his extremism. Shot Auda on the spot while the Israeli army was watching. So this is one incident. We need to remind ourselves that this is not an isolated incident. This is happening all across the West Bank. I do have one statistic also that is really devastating of settler attacks happening since October 7th. That this is escalation from last year's records. So since October 7th, 2023, we're talking about 4,251 settler attacks. And when we talk about attacks, this includes killings, but also injuries, but also destruction and damage of homes and properties of Palestinians. This year alone, 2025, we are talking about 2,374 for settler attacks against Palestinian communities. This year as well, we're talking about 11 Palestinians who have been killed by Israeli settlers, including the case that I mentioned of Auda Hadalin, who is a very young, prominent face and activist in the community of Masafer Yatta.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Aseel AlBajeh. We're going to be discussing, of course, the Knesset, who have given the green light or the stamp of approval for the complete annexation of the West Bank. What does this mean for Benjamin Netanyahu and his government's plan for the quote-unquote Greater Israel Project? Do stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Aseel AlBajeh, who is the Advocacy and Campaigns Officer at the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. We are discussing the recent attacks that have been occurring across the occupied West Bank. Again, thank you so much for staying with us, Aseel. Aseel, the Knesset plan for, obviously, the stamp of approval which was given a few weeks ago, and of course this linking to the annexation. Again, this should not come as a surprise to many, because this was the Israeli plan all along. When you look at the Likud and its constitution, it says quite clearly that there is this idea of annexing every single part of Palestine. My question to you, Aseel, is when you see the West and its supposed, not just silence of it, but the allowing of Israel to do it, it really speaks of not just a disgusting aspect to it, but also a sort of sense of giving Israel this green light with its silence to allow for this to happen.
True, thank you. So just a brief on this specific plan that was approved by the Knesset from this month. This is basically called what they call the Israelis E1 settlement plan. And what this plan entails is that they want to connect a very, of course, an illegal settlement called Ma'ali Adumim in the West Bank to the Jerusalem area. And what would that do is that it would split, actually, the West Bank in half. So it would separate the northern and central West Bank parts from the south. And it would also split the movement between Jerusalem and the West Bank. And the manifestation of this plan is that they want to build more than 3,400 housing units for settlers to do this connection of settlements. And what, of course, this entails is that when they create this plan, they are forcibly displacing and stealing land and homes of anything that is in between. So we're talking about the geographic scope of this area, about 18 Palestinian Bedouin communities who live in this area. There are about 3,500 Palestinians living in these areas that are at risk now of forcible displacement and ethnic cleansing. And what this plan means in the broader system, because this is also just one plan that manifests the annexation plans of the Israeli government, is that they do not want to create, they want to further the fragmentation of the Palestinian people, of the Palestinian land, so that there's no connection of Palestinian lands in terms of movements or social cohesion or political mobilization as Palestinians. So they're creating these Bantustans of Palestinian communities while expanding the settlement project. And I do want to remind that also this is not about a far-right Israeli government or a specific individual in the government. This is a systemic policy since century of the Zionist settler colonial project. And actually this E1 settlement plan has been proposed since the 90s by the Israeli government, by the then, who was then Israeli Prime Minister Rabin, who's supposedly a leftist party in the Israeli government. So this also tells us that it doesn't matter if it's a right-wing or left-wing party. The Israeli government in general, as a Zionist settler colonial project, the entire project, regardless of the government, is about displacing Palestinian and controlling the land. Last week we saw that Smotrich, the Israeli minister, was actually talking and commenting about this specific E1 plan. He was saying, these are his words, those in the world trying to recognize a Palestinian state will get an answer from us on the ground. So this also tells us that, as you said, they are given the green light from the international community, whose maximum pressure point is condemnation. Right after the plan was proposed, we're seeing 21 countries, including Western countries, coming up and condemning the E1 settlement plan as a violation of international law. But still, we do not see any concrete measures to stop this annexation, whether on this specific plan, but also on centuries of on a century and decades of illegal occupation and a genocide happening. So instead of them actually sanctioning the Israeli government diplomatically, economically, stopping, of course, the most important at this moment, which we're witnessing a genocide, military and energy trade with the Israeli government. We're not seeing that. We're just seeing more and more empty condemnation from world leaders. And the maximum that they're doing and that they're pushing right now is also the recognition of the Palestine state. But what Palestine state are they recognizing? The state of Bantustans, whereas, as Smotrich has said, we are making you see that this is the reality that you are recognizing.
Yeah, so, and I want to touch on Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. So Smotrich last week said, and I'm going to quote this, he said, I'll get you the money, give me the plan. So I think he was referring to one of the Israeli settlers. So we've got these two individuals within the far right, and it's important, and you've mentioned it, Aseel, that even though Benjamin Netanyahu's government party is the Likud party, this is a overall plan of the Israeli government to go ahead and seize all the land because the Likud party has it as part of its constitution. So here's the thing, when you have these two individuals here who are not just going ahead and giving the green light for the Israeli settlers to continue these attacks, but the one provocation that stands out is when you have Itamar Ben-Gvir going into the Al-Aqsa compound and, of course, causing problems there. Therein lies your problem, doesn't it? Because it's quite clear. They want to seize all the land, and even if it means them going into the Al-Aqsa compound, a very holy place for Muslims, they're going to go ahead and do it.
Indeed. Yeah, I think individuals like Smotrich or Ben-Gvir are just basically a testament of, as I said, successive Israeli government whose main goal is the same, basically to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, insert domination, and control the land. The only difference I would say between these individuals and others is that they are more they do not shy away from even showing the intent of their genocidal mentality and their annexation mentality. They go very vocal about it. And the example you gave about the storming or being in Al-Aqsa Mosque and raiding a holy site in Jerusalem is also to show off this Israeli domination over Palestinians. And here also it's important to remind that it's not about religion. From the Israeli side when they attack the Holy Mosque of Al-Aqsa, because they're also attacking Christian Palestinian communities and holy sites. We've seen a lot of attacks also in the past period, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank, in churches, in Christian communities by the Israeli government and settlers. So this is also important to keep in mind on the intention behind these attacks is to attack the Palestinian as Palestinian and not their religious belief and so on. I do think that the current Israeli government has been taking advantage of the genocide in Gaza, including individuals like Smotrich, to accelerate the annexation of the West Bank. And unfortunately, they have, I wouldn't use the word succeed, but they have advanced a lot of land theft since October 7th in the occupied West Bank.
Aseel, I've got just 2 minutes. When we link this to, of course, what is currently happening in Gaza, it's quite clear, isn't it? When you see the plans to go ahead and occupy Gaza City, this Greater Israel project, from an Israeli perspective, they are pushing and it is gaining momentum. And it's quite clear, isn't it, that the ethnic cleansing of all Palestinians, which the Israeli government wants, there is a momentum gathering there, isn't there?
Of course, it's really important to wrap up this conversation in saying that all these attacks and military raids happening and annexation happening in the West Bank is part of the same project with the genocide happening in Gaza, where now we're seeing famine being reaffirmed by international organization. But of course, the situation of forced starvation has been happening for months right now. The invasion of Gaza city, that is also accelerating, the ethnic cleansing and so on. So it's the same policies happening in occupied West Bank and in Gaza city and in the Gaza Strip, but at different levels. And it is part of the same project. We're now seeing the Israeli government pushing for and attacking even the bare minimum of recognizing even a Palestinian state that they see is a violation on their sovereignty, for what you mentioned a lot, which is that they want to, which is part of their constitution, that they want to impose Israeli Jewish domination over the entirety of Palestinian land, including the occupied parts in Gaza and the West Bank, but also the rest of the occupied Palestine, where 2 million Palestinians reside who have Israeli citizenship. And also, we should not forget that when we talk about the Palestinian cause, we're talking about half of the Palestinian people who are outside of the land Palestine, who have been denied their right of return since 1948. So if you look at these fragments of how Israel imposes domination and fragmentation and colonial violence against each fragment, it is different tactics, different levels, but it is the same goal, to dominate the land of Palestine and ethnically cleanse the entire population.
Aseel, absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus.
Thank you.
That is Aseel AlBajeh, who is the Advocacy and Campaigns Officer at the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. After the break, I'm going to be speaking to Dr. Katlego Motudi. He is from the Board of Healthcare Funders. They are taking the NHI bill to the Constitutional Court as they believe there is some sort of unconstitutional aspect with regards to it. My conversation with Dr. Motudi is after the break.